Hey, what's going on YouTube? So today we're going to talk about this Panasonic Lumix DMC-FX2. It's a compact point and shoot from 2004. Has this beautiful Leica lens with roughly 35mm to 105mm zoom range. Has a 4 megapixel sensor, so it's a little low, but again, it's a pretty old camera, and the lens is optically stabilized. Overall build quality is pretty good. I don't know if it's made of metal or plastic, but it's pretty cool to the touch and it feels sturdy. Let me give you a tour of the camera here. So there's this on-off switch. It's your zoom rocker and shutter button. This is the button to turn on and off the lens stabilizer, but you pretty much always want to keep that on. There's some ports here that are really old, and then we have a mode dial right here. So there's a few modes to go through. You have your picture playback, auto picture mode. This is simple picture mode, macro mode. There's a handful of scene modes that I can show you in a second. And this is video, which is very low resolution. You have a few menu buttons and shortcuts here, like timer, exposure, compensation, and flash. And then a quick review button so you can check the pictures without changing mode dial. And then you can change your display options and delete pictures or change your drive mode for continuous shooting. There's nothing on this side of the camera. And then on the bottom, you have your tripod mount. And then here you have your battery door. So the battery has its own retention clip, which is nice. It's a pretty small battery. I have like a third-party caster battery. It doesn't last too long. You can get, I don't know, maybe 100 or 200 pictures before this thing dies. And it's nice that it has its own retention clip, because then if the battery door breaks, which a lot of these old cameras have flimsy battery doors, it stays in and you can still turn the camera on. The card is also quite small, so I have 512 megabyte, and it has to be like original SD, like the old slow version. This is a pretty old camera, so I got a micro SD because it was easier to find. I tried a few bigger cards. They didn't work on here, so 4 gigabytes is too big. I think you might be able to get away with 1 or 2 gigs. Turning on the camera here it's pretty quick. It takes about a second, and then it boots up. The screen is on. We can go through the modes here so you can look at your old pictures, just sort of a basic picture mode. So this will do mostly auto. Like I said, this is a simple mode. This is macro mode. I can show you the different scene modes. So they have a few here, pretty standard scenes. You can pause and take a look at these if you're interested. And then, like I said, the video is really low resolution. It's, I think, like 340 by 240 or something like that. It's super low, and there's no audio, so not very useful. I mostly shoot in the full auto mode right here. And see this display button, I can show you a few of the different display options. So you can get your heads-up display here, and then you can sort of change your flash mode. This is exposure compensation, so you can change your exposure into auto bracketing, and then you can set a timer as well. And so this card, even though it's half a gigabyte, has over 200 pictures. And like I said, the battery lasts also about 100 to 200 pictures anyways, so it works out. You don't really need that big of a card. You even have a histogram, so I can put the case here so you can see. You can get blacks and whites, so that this is an old camera, but it still has a live histogram. And then most of the time I just leave it on the thirds grid just for framing and composition. You can go through the menu options here. So you have in your setup menu, you have a few options here. In the record mode, you have white balance. So you just leave this on auto. ISO. ISO range only goes up to 400. You pretty much don't want to use anything over 100 anyways. Picture size, so you can do smaller size pictures, but I mean, this is already 4 megapixels, so it's pretty small. Is the JPEG quality. File sizes are so small, so just leave this at the highest quality. Autofocus, you can have different autofocus points. AF assist lamp, that's just the little red light to help low light autofocusing. And you can set a minimum slow shutter, so if you know your hands are kind of shaky, you can make the lowest shutter speed a little bit faster so that you can avoid camera shake. But again, that'll that'll move your ISO up, because the faster the shutter, the higher the ISO has to be, especially with a small sensor like this in this camera. And there's some digital zoom. I leave it off. It looks pretty bad. You only have 4 megapixels, so you can't really crop in. There are some different color modes that you can try, and then you can change vividness of the picture to a couple of standard profiles. Those are the menus. It's pretty straightforward. It's a pretty basic camera, but it shoots pretty pleasing pictures with pretty good color. It's very affordable, very compact if you're looking for something a little more ergonomic that you want to carry around and not just use your smartphone for everything. But I will be comparing it to my Pixel 9 Pro, which is what I'm recording with right now. And we'll see how the pictures turn out compared to the smartphone that's in my pocket. But I'm not going to like crop in or do any pixel peeping or anything like that, because I just want to look at sort of social media and, you know, casual family memories type photos. Obviously, you're not going to buy something like this for professional work. But yeah, let's take this out and take some pictures and see what we get. All right, let's compare some of these FX2 photos with some Pixel 9 Pro photos. So in each of these sets, they're taken at the same time. This is a Rutgers building. The settings are on the right there. This was shot at around 60 millimeter focal length for full frame equivalent. See, I think the picture is quite nice. It's got this kind of warmish glow that a lot of people are looking for, especially compared to the Pixel photo. The Pixel photo is a lot more blue, is a lot cooler, has a lot more accurate colors, whereas the FX2 is slightly washed out. The sky is a little blown out. The dynamic range is definitely lacking on this older camera, especially compared to the Pixel. Smartphones have a lot of computational photography, so they can stack a lot of HDR. I will note that this is shot at 2x on the Pixel, so that's technically a digital crop on the main sensor, but it's one of the fixed crops that is made available to you and is sort of computationally enhanced. I personally like that 50 millimeter look better than the 1x 24 millimeter look. That's just a personal thing. But yeah, I would say overall, both of these pictures are fine. The Pixel technically is better, but I quite like the FX2. I quite like how it looks. I think that the sky being blown out actually makes it less distracting. You know exactly where you're supposed to be looking, at this bright red part of the building with the Rutgers logo on it, whereas in the Pixel picture, that red part is a little bit subdued and you get a lot more colors in the grass and the sky, and that's not really the subject of the photo. At least that's not the subject that I intended for the photo. Here's another building at Rutgers. This is one of the engineering buildings. Has a lot of nice angles and this nice little red accent on the door. Again, similar story when you look at the FX2. The sky is kind of blown out. Colors are a little bit more washed out and muted. The contrast's a little washed out as well. Compared to Pixel, you get a lot more blue in the sky. You get a lot more texture in the shadows and the clouds up there. So the sky isn't blown out, a lot more dynamic range. Overall, the colors are pretty similar. The white balance is a little bit different. I think the subject of this picture, which is the building and that red accent on the door, are quite similar, and really the sky on both of these are not that distracting because even on the Pixel it's mostly clouds up there. There's not a whole lot of blue and texture to distract you. So yeah, both of these are good, I think. This next photo I think is kind of a miss from the FX2. I saw the American flag and this magnolia tree, and it was a nice tree. The flowers were in bloom. I thought it would frame the flag very well. But there's a lot of sky, a lot of empty space in the top right, and I think that caused the exposure to go down because this camera didn't want to blow out the picture because of all of that sky. Because of that, everything else is just really dark.
it's really hard to see what's going on. This was shot at 35 millimeters, so this is fully zoomed out on the FX2. And looking at the pixel, that's roughly a 1.4x crop on the pixel's main sensor. And the pixel just did a lot better job here. The dynamic range that it captures allows the camera to expose the tree and the flowers underneath it while still keeping that sky from being totally blown out. And you can really see the color in the flowers pop. That was really what I saw in real life, that I thought this would make a good picture. The FX2 just kind of really dropped the ball here. Maybe if I had spent a little bit more time taking a few more pictures, it may have gotten what I was hoping for, but quick snapshot, it just missed. Whereas the Pixel kind of nailed it. So this one's definitely a win for the Pixel. This next picture, I think we see more of the same here. So the FX2 sky is a bit blown out. Other than that, picture looks pretty good. Compare it to the Pixel, and again, you can see a little bit more sky and the grass is a little bit greener. But overall, I think both these pictures look very similar. To my eye, there's some moire in the bricks with the Pixel that I don't see quite as much with the FX2. I say the FX2 is a little bit undersaturated, but you could touch that up in post if you really wanted to. Overall, I think these are pretty similar, and I don't think there's anything wrong with this FX2 photo. This next picture is of the Waxman Institute at Rutgers. This is like a very collegiate looking building. A lot of red brick, green grass, not so much blue sky today. But yeah, you can see the FX2, it even handled the sky a little bit better here. I think the overcast made it easier. And then compared to the Pixel, honestly, these pictures look very similar. There's like a little change in color science and saturation, but overall both these pictures are very similar, and I think they both look pretty good. In this next series of photos, I just wanted to test the zoom range of this camera. So here's the FX2 zoomed out at 35 millimeter. This is the same building as the last shot. And then looking at the Pixel, this is the Pixel using the 1x camera. So this is 24 millimeter wide angle main camera. The Pixel also has an ultra wide, so it can go wider than this, even more. But I just wanted to compare widest main camera on each. You could see that field of view is much tighter on the FX2 with 35 millimeter. Pixel has a much wider field of view. You get kind of that wide angle distortion though, so you have to use it correctly. I'll also note that in this wider angle shot, because there's so much more sky, again, that dynamic range comes into play, and you can see the FX2 didn't really do a good job with that. All that sky caused the exposure to go down, the really high shutter speed, and the sky is pretty well exposed, but then the building is pretty underexposed. As compared to the Pixel, the whole image is fairly well exposed. So the wider you go, the more that dynamic range issue comes into play. Next, checking the fully zoomed in. So the FX2, my old camera, has some spots on the sensor or lens that you can see here. Fully zoomed in, it's at 105 millimeter. The aperture goes down quite a bit zoomed in, but yeah, it looks pretty good. You get a nice close-up of the clock tower on the building. Switching to the Pixel has a 5x camera on the Pixel 9 Pro. Depending on what smartphone you have, you may or may not have a 5x telephoto third camera. Some will have a 3x telephoto, and a lot of the base model phones don't have a third telephoto camera, so you might not get this on your phone. But on the Pixel 9 Pro, at least you get this 5x, which is roughly 110 millimeter. You can see it's about the same field of view. It's slight farther zoomed in. The detail and dynamic range, all that stuff. Zoom range, this has very similar zoom capabilities as the smartphone. The smartphone gets a little bit wider on the main camera, and again has that even ultra wide shot. But for telephoto, sort of portrait, farther zoomed in, subjects that are a little bit farther away, you get a similar amount of zoom. Here I want to check the macro mode on the camera. So as I said before, there's a macro mode setting for near focus. So I took a picture of this flower in my front yard. You can see the colors pop really nice. The details really quite pleasing. This picture looks pretty good. When you switch to the Pixel, I don't think the colors are quite as nice, but what you do notice is that the background is way blurrier on the Pixel, whether that's computational or if that has to do with the optics and the sensor. The sensor is technically bigger, so it should get more background blur. But yeah, these both look pretty good. I think the FX2 did better, even though that background is not so blurry. For a macro shot, it's not that big a deal because all three of the yellow flowers are in focus with the FX2, whereas on the Pixel, that third flower in the back is a bit blurry and it's not exactly what I was going for. And the colors aren't quite right, but you could fix that with some minor editing. So overall, yeah, I think the FX2 did a great job with this picture. This is a long exposure done at night using the FX2. So here it exposed for 4 whole seconds, and it does not look very good. It's kind of shaky, blurry, it's not really well exposed. Everything's kind of, you can't really see anything. That is in stark contrast to the Pixel, which does a great job using its night mode. It does a lot of image stacking here. It says it's 1/17th of a second, but that's not true. I held the phone for quite a while, at least 2 or 3 seconds, maybe if not more. But it stacks a bunch of these shorter exposure images together and aligns them so that they're still nice and sharp, and it looks great. So yeah, if you're gonna take a picture at night, definitely use your smartphone. This picture is a macro shot of this circuit board that I took on the FX2. I didn't turn the flash on because this close to a subject, the flash kind of just blows out the whole thing. Instead, I'm just holding a flashlight off to the side to illuminate the subject. You can see the exposure was a little bit long, 1/8 of a second, so I had to be pretty steady holding the light and camera at the same time. But overall, it looks pretty good. Colors are nice, details are pretty good. It's not the sharpest picture, but if we switch to the Pixel, you can see here the Pixel looks a lot sharper. It's a little warm, but that's fine. You can fix that. The exposure was a little bit faster, which might make it a little bit sharper, but it also might just be sharper because the image is sharper. It does look like the Pixel kind of sharpened it in post as well. Some of this looks a little artificially sharp, but overall, I think the Pixel probably did a better job here. It looks cleaner. I think if you just fix the white balance, it would be a better picture. Whereas the FX2, it's just a little blurry. For like a close product macro thing like this, your phone will do better. This next set of photos, I wanted to test out portrait mode on this camera and on the Pixels. So these are pictures of my daughter's doll, just as a consistent subject. So this is the doll standing outside on a picnic table in the middle of the day, using the portrait mode setting, scene mode on the FX2 at 50mm. I thought 50mm would be a pretty good portrait focal length, and so yeah, it looks pretty good. There's not a whole lot of background blur, like basically at all, so the image looks pretty flat compared to the Pixel. So this is at 2x, so this is that computational crop mode that the Pixel has, but it's roughly 50mm, and this is using the portrait mode on the Pixel, so it has that sort of computational background blur. It looks pretty convincing. If you crop in on the hair, you will see artifacts, but I'm not going to do that here. You're just going to look at it on this 4K timeline and see that it's pretty convincing. And so, yeah, between these two, Pixel is way better at portraits, but that'll all change once we start looking at some flash. So here's that same scene, but just zoomed in a little bit farther. So instead of at 50mm, we're at 105mm. So you get a little more telephoto, a little more background compression. Again, it's not blurry, but there's just less of it because of the perspective and the more telephoto lens. This is a bit better for a portrait, I think. If I were to take portraits with this camera, I would do it all the way zoomed in. But again, without any background blur, it looks pretty flat. Switching to the Pixel, so this is the Pixel at 5x, which is again roughly 110mm, so very similar focal length. You get that background compression. The 5x camera does not have the computational portrait mode, so that's one of the limitations to leaning on computation instead of just physics, is that if the software hasn't been optimized for a particular scene zoom setting that you want, like you just don't have it. Whereas everything that's optical, like it's always going to be optical because it's physics and not computation. So in this case, we don't get that extra blurred background. You can see that the two images are remarkably similar, and besides a subtle difference in exposure, which you could fix with exposure compensation, like the actual optics of these two pictures are very similar. The background blur, the field of view, everything. So yeah, it just goes to show that this camera that's super old actually keeps up pretty well with even the telephoto lens on the flagship Pixel camera. Moving on to some flash photography. So I thought the FX2 would really win this one. It does pretty well. So this is that same scene, but now I've waited until nighttime. There is a small doorway lamp side of my patio door that's on, so it's not complete darkness, and the moon was out as well, but most of the light here is coming from the flash. You can see we have a pretty long 1-second exposure. Again, this is at 50mm. It's a very similar shot to the one that we were doing during the day. You can see that both at 1 second, this camera's image stabilizer is pretty darn good, pretty sharp most of the places. There might be a little subtle softness in the eyes, but overall this flash, I mean, this is what we want from these old Digicams, are these nice flash pictures. But I was very surprised by this Pixel. The Pixel is very convincing with the flash that it gives you. It turns on just the LED flashlight and it does this long exposure. The file metadata says that the shutter speed is 1/13 seconds, which is just totally wrong. I had to hold the phone like completely still for multiple seconds with the LED flashlight on to get this long flash exposure, but it does the image stacking so well that even with that long exposure, this is sharper than the FX2. Like the FX2 looks a little bit soft around the face, whereas this is sharp pretty much everywhere. So it stacks all these short pictures. What I imagine is it probably took like hundreds of photos at 1/13 seconds and just stacked them all together. And it looks really good, really convincing. The only downside is that your subject can't move, which this is a doll, so it doesn't move. But if you take a picture of a real person, or in my case, I take pictures of my kids a lot, they're always moving. So you just can't use the pixel flash with children. But it looks really good if they stand still for a minute. Even though the FX2 looks great as well, I really think the Pixel really surprised me here. So I took the doll inside to take some flash photos indoors. So this is kind of like what you would take a lot of indoor photos with flash. The lights are on. It's, you can see, but the cameras still count this as kind of low light. So the flash really helps with illuminating the image. And this FX2 does exactly what you want it to do. It gives you a nice flash, gives you that harsh flash on the subject, that roll off in the background. Even though there's no background blur, you get that background separation because of the difference in the exposure, because the subject is closer to the flash on the camera. But the Pixel, again, does really well. So the subject separation on the flash isn't as good. It doesn't quite illuminate the subject quite as strikingly, especially with extra light sort of filling the background from just the lamps inside my house. But because it also has that portrait mode, you get that blurred background. So this is both flash with portrait mode, and it looks really good. So I really like this Pixel picture. I think if you have a subject, like a person that you would actually take a portrait of, not a doll, but if they will stand still for you, this is a great tool for flash photography. It doesn't quite give you that Y2K harsh flash that the FX2 does. So I think the FX2 also does really good. And the FX2, again, is 1/60 because we're inside. There's a lot more light, so it didn't expose for as long. And that means that you could take pictures of subjects that are not sitting perfectly still. They won't be blurry at 1/60 if they're reasonably still. Whereas the Pixel, again, you have to hold the camera for multiple seconds as it stacks all these photos. So the subject has to be perfectly still. This is the last picture with dolls. I took a few of my daughter's other dolls to take this group photo. I used the party mode on the camera with the flash. And so this is kind of just like if you were to take a group photo of some friends at a bar, I don't know. I mean, it looks like a pretty normal flash photo, indoor flash photo. It looks pretty good. For the Pixel, I didn't use the flash because this is a kind of scenario where I would expect that people are going to be moving or there's going to be stuff moving in the background. This is kind of just to simulate like a quick snap at a party. Like you're not asking everyone to just stand still in like a studio or something. And so no flash here. It still takes a good photo. Everything is sharp, everything is clear, but you just don't get that cool flash look. And there's no portrait mode this far zoomed out either. So you don't get that background blur. And yeah, this is something where the FX2 would work much better. 1/60th of a second, so pretty quick snapshot. You don't have to worry about people moving around or other people in the background moving around. I think the FX2 really does well here. So I think the moral of the story with these portraits are that if you are using the flash, the FX2 works great. If your subject decides to stand perfectly still for multiple seconds, the Pixel can do a really good job. If you're not using the flash, like outdoors in the middle of the day, that Pixel portrait mode is really good. So yeah, it goes either way here. I don't think you would be disappointed with the FX2 if it was the only camera you had on you, but it definitely is worth taking your smartphone out for some of these portrait shots.
In conclusion, this little Lumix camera is pretty great. Outside in the daylight, it shoots pretty good photos, pretty close to your smartphone, a little bit low on the dynamic range. Inside with the flash on, takes those beautiful vintage flash shots, some warm tones. The only time it really struggles is when you're outside at nighttime and the flash just isn't strong enough to light up something farther away. The low light out without the flash is pretty poor on this. You can just take your phone out to do that. But yeah, overall, this is a nice little camera if you're looking for something compact, fits in your pocket. You can take it out, take a picture, press a physical button because sometimes it's just nice to use a real camera over your phone. Or maybe you want to leave your phone behind. Like this is great for taking pictures without any distractions. You don't get any notifications, emails, pop-ups, or anything like that. Take this out, leave your phone at home. That could be nice too. This specific camera I found in my parents' basement, so this one was free. But you can find cameras like this, the FX2, other FX cameras, FS or FH cameras for, 30, 40 bucks on eBay. They're not too expensive. Canon, Nikon, Sony, they all make cameras like this. I can't speak to how good they are. But yeah, in terms of a compact little camera, this one's pretty good. I'd say if you are looking for something to shoot with that's not your phone, picking one of these up for cheap is not a bad deal.